Welcome back to the Rock Your Retirement Show. I'm your host, Kathy Klein, and today we have Tay Kim back for the last episode on the series of intergenerational living from a young person's perspective. If you are living in a multi-generational household or considering it, you must listen to this series. Last week, we discussed the pros and cons of multi-generational living, as well as some things that we talked about. You'll have to go listen to it. Today, we are talking about tips for living in a multi-generational household. Are you living in a multi-generational household or considering having your parents move in? Do you take care of aging parents as well as your own children? Do you know someone who is having challenges with caring for their parents? If any of these situations are yours, then this series is for you. My guest today is a blogger. He writes about navigating the intersection between personal finance and being in the sandwich generation. Tay and his wife cohabitate with his aging parents while raising their own children and building their careers. But before we start, I wanted to tell you that this episode is brought to you by the Medicare Quick Step-by-Step Guide for signing up for Medicare. If you're signing up for Medicare, you already know how confusing it can be. This step-by-step guide is absolutely free and will help you easily make the transition into Medicare. Get it free at medicarequick.com/checklist. Okay, let's go ahead and bring on Tay Kim. Tay, I have a friend whose father-in-law moved in with her unexpectedly last year. Now she's struggling because he was only supposed to be visiting, but he's been there now for a whole year. Her father-in-law is older. He would be your grandparents' age. He's in
Mm.
the greatest generation. And unfortunately, he expects women to do all the cooking and cleaning. My friend does not like cleaning up after him, and she feels like she's lost her freedom. Did your wife go through any of this when your parents moved in, or do you have any tips for my friend? Of course, yours was more planned than my
Mhm,
friend's.
mhm.
Hers was kind of, all of a sudden he was living there.
Right, right. It came for a visit and then it became a year. That's
Exactly. And he's
um
probably not leaving.
yeah, definitely that's a challenging situation. Yeah, ours was a little more intentional, reluctant but intentional. So my family is Korean, so for us there's a little more generational and cultural component to it in the Asian culture. For us, thankfully, my dad, he definitely doesn't go into the kitchen often, but because my mom is there, I think she recognizes, they've been together for 40 years now, so she recognizes what he needs. Small things like I get a cup of water, he just leaves it on the dining room table.
Yes, that is the problem that my friend is having.
Yeah, so I don't know if it did bother my wife. I think I would have to be the one to clean up, just
Happy
part of that.
wife, happy life.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Yeah, I'm
So
very, very appreciative of what she's doing so
so
far.
maybe my friend should talk to her husband and say, "Look, he's your dad. If he doesn't clean up,
Right,
that's your job."
right, right, right. I could understand a little bit better just because I grew up with my parents. I mean, it's tougher on the spouse. You can't be as direct. Daughter-in-law, it's hard for her to talk to her father-in-law and hey, you need to clean this up. You can't just leave a mess for us. Whereas the son, I think, can be a little more. Hey, it's a different generation now. Times are a little bit different. All of us have to contribute. It might be her husband needed to step in a little more just to avoid any kind of. For me, it's more of like in order to avoid issues down the line, I would rather do the work up front.
You know what? That's interesting because this article that we are looking at, which is called Tips for Generational
Mhm,
Living by Amy Goyer, she
mhm,
didn't really mention that the actual son or daughter of the
mhm,
person moving, it's kind of like having a stepchild. If you're the step parent, you really can't discipline the child the same way as if you're the
mhm,
biological parent.
mhm, mhm,
I
mhm.
mean, and you've done that with your wife. You've kind of stepped in between your wife and your
Yeah.
parents.
Yes, definitely. That's for me probably one of the most like stressful, tense moments when she has an issue with certain things that like my mom does or my dad does, and then she can't voice it out like she can do to her mom. So when I come home, I it's more of I could like subtly feel it based on her look. She would give me that look, and I'm like, uh-oh, like what transpired in the last 2 hours that I'm not aware of. And then of course we have to go into our bedroom, and she would kind of unload on me. Definitely, from my perspective, as we're living together, being empathetic to my wife, doubly challenging for her. She's not living with her parents, she's living with my parents. So I think for me, it's very important to recognize that and appreciate that. Being able to listen to her without being judgmental, but just kind of hear her out. Because at the same time, I could feel like, oh, well, that's how my mom does it, or that's how dad does it. Just, don't let it bother you. But, that's kind of dismissing how she's feeling. So then I think just being able to hear her out. For me, I like to think in a very problem solving way. So I'm kind of like, okay, how can we mitigate this in the future? So I think one of the things that the article talked about was like planning ahead space boundaries. So this is very small, but like we've had to think about one of the tension points was we all share this community fridge. Everyone shops at their own timeline, and then everybody would just kind of stuff their own things in different sections of the refrigerator. When my wife would want to go come cook, and she's like, goodness, like where's the carrot that I just bought like last week? Like I placed it here. This is one of those items where it keeps coming up. So we had to come up with like we actually labeled parts of the refrigerator saying, okay, this is Monica's section, like this is grandma's section. Like we don't go into each other's section. Everyone's got their own sections.
So buying a second fridge was not an option.
Well, so we do have a second fridge, but because it's in the laundry room, it's not so convenient. Yeah, so the daily stuff that you're going to eat, we had to come up with a system of separating parts of the refrigerator and then just reinforcing it on a regular basis.
When your kids get older, you're going to have a big problem.
True. As they eat more, they want their own section in the fridge, probably.
It'll be the laundry room for the kids. It's like, okay, kids, laundry room.
Yeah. I know it's like 20 feet away, but hey, someone's got to make the sacrifices, and you're the youngest and healthiest. So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, that actually is good. And then didn't you also do something about the space as far as where the children are allowed to barge in or not, as far as bedrooms are concerned?
So I think just having a norm that everyone has their own, like my parents have their own bedrooms, and then we have our bedroom. So then the kids actually are a little more, they kind of barge into wherever they want to because, they're 3 and 6. We are more considerate of like knowing, hey, grandma's in their room. We got to make sure we knock before we can ask her anything. Thankfully, my parents also do the same. And then we are trying to condition our kids now. When grandpa's in his room, you can't just run in there, do whatever you want. You gotta, like that's his room. So I think just recognizing that everyone has their own personal space in the house. And one of the things that helped out was having separate communal space within the house. So thankfully in our house, we have parts of the house. It's like a family room for the 4 of us, my wife, myself, and our kids. And then my parents have their own little community area where they can have their television, their couch, lay out the things that they want. And we're not getting into each other's space as regards to like who left the newspaper here or who left their shoes here. But they can we can create our own mess. They can create their own mess, and we're not getting into each other's space. So I think that was very important.
So you like have a family room and a parlor? Is that how it's set up, or
it's like a closed off patio, like a sunroom?
Yeah. Nice.
So,
you have that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of my listeners, their sandwich generation is different than yours because what they're doing is they're taking care of their kids in college financially, and then they're taking physical care of their parents,
right?
Be your grandparents' age.
Yeah.
And so things are a little bit different for them because they're not probably taking care of small children, although they could be because people in college can have children.
Yeah. It could be like 4 generations,
That's right. And it does happen.
Yeah.
It's happening more and more. I had a woman in my church before I left San Diego. She was 108 when she passed.
Wow.
Yeah, people are living longer and longer. And I'm sure you know that a lot of Asian people live a long time. I don't
Yeah.
know if, I don't know if
Yeah.
that is what you're eating or just the mere fact that you're Asian, because a lot of Asian people smoke, when you go to Asia.
Yeah.
I don't know about here.
Yeah.
Probably not so much in LA. There's
Yeah.
not a lot of places where you can smoke in Los Angeles.
hmm
But so
hmm
I don't know if it's just good genes. I mean, how long are your grandparents still living?
So both my grandparents passed away, but my grandmother lived. She passed away when she was 90. Same with my wife's grandmother. She passed away when she was 92. So I guess, yeah, I mean, like it's for my dad, he's 70, 71, and my mother's 69. So, I mean, that's 20 more years plus more. I mean, given that like our grandparents grew up in a tougher time. So then if they could live to 90, then I mean, my parents could live till they're 100.
That's right.
So it'll
Absolutely.
be, yeah.
You have been talking about the money the
Mhm,
whole
mhm.
time that we've been having these conversations. But do you put money into a big pot, or is it just, okay, you pay yours, we'll pay ours, and we're taking care of the house? How does that work?
Yeah, that was something that was cleared up front that when we decided to cohabitate, we would take over the mortgage. Majority of the utility expense, my parents thankfully said they could take care of electric bill and the phone bill. So that we just kind of cleared up saying, okay, like we take care of the gas bill, the water bill, the mortgage, and then you guys take care of the phone bill and the electric bill. So I think that made it clear, like we don't have a joint bank account. We just pay our own bills.
What about
Um,
food?
yeah, food is a little interesting. We don't have like a clear agreement. My wife and I, we would go and do our own shopping at Costco for what we want. Like if we're gonna pack lunch for work or we're gonna pack something for the kids. And then my parents, they purchase what they want to. And then I think just a natural overlap of like, hey, we're out of bananas.
We'll
Who's
eat
going?
theirs.
Yeah, yeah, we'll have. There's no like separate like this is my banana, this is your
This is
banana.
mine. You can't have my bananas. Those are mine.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. We have our separate sections in the fridge. Maybe if it's banana in that section, then,
You better
Uh,
not eat it.
yeah, yeah. But whatever's out in the more in the community area, it's kind of open for everybody. So yeah, with grocery, there hasn't been much like clear boundaries we had to create. I think we don't, and one of the things that we do in our family, there is no kind of expectation that we have to eat together all the time. My wife and I, we would have our own dinner, and then my parents are totally fine having their own dinner at their own separate time. And I think this makes things a little more, it's better. It just kind of works for everybody instead of people being dependent upon each other's timing or dependent upon someone buying the food. So that's worked out well for us.
That's good. So you've mentioned before that your parents help you with childcare.
Yes.
And so what are they doing with the 3-year-old? Because that
Mhm.
child is not old enough to go to school yet.
She goes to preschool actually.
Okay.
So when both my son and my daughter was born, for the first year, my mom actually oversaw. So we paid her to recognize the time that she's putting in, and then she subcontracted one of her friends to come and watch jointly watch the baby. So then both my son and my daughter were cared for by my mom and her subcontract friend for the first 12 to 18 months. And at the 18 months, there was a local daycare that's really close to our house that we sent them to. So they're both right now, my 3-year-old, she's in the preschool daycare, and then my son's going to the kindergarten at the same school.
And then your mom, she didn't care that you were taking away her job. She was happy that now she had her days back.
Oh yeah, yeah. She was. I think she was counting it down. It was. What's funny is that there's actually a funny story. So there's a typical question of like, oh, you guys have one kid. Are you guys thinking about having a second? And then we're like, okay, we had a second, of course. Like second, are you guys thinking about having a third? And I think my mom, she visited us at the hospital when my daughter was born. And of course, my wife just delivered, so she's in the room. And I went downstairs to grab my mom. And on the elevator right up, she's like, all right, you guys are done. Like,
That's
I'm
it.
telling you, you guys are done. Like, if you're going for number 3, calling your mother-in-law, she's like, I'm done.
Yeah, I'm not
This is
taking
the
care of
last.
the third child, so
Yeah,
forget
yeah.
that.
She was very clear with that. So it's like, okay, we've pushed it as far as we can.
So talk about setting expectations. That's what she was doing with you. She was
Oh,
setting your
exactly.
expectation.
Exactly. She was very clear with us. She's like, if you guys are gonna have thirds, don't call me. Like, this is it.
So would you have had a third child if she wouldn't have said that?
Uh, Probably not. I think we've definitely struggled with our careers, trying to raise two kids. Before we had kids, we were like, oh, like three, four, who knows? The possibility is endless. And then like once we had our second kid, we're like, we're done.
It can be, it can be expensive in a coastal city like where you live.
Yeah, I mean the preschools, the daycares, they're definitely not cheap.
Yes. And so, talking in that area about where you live and space and things like that, you've also done a really good job of setting the boundaries in your
Mhm,
home.
mhm, mhm.
And you also talked about the fact that your parents are paying the phone bill. Does that mean that you have
Yes.
a landline?
No, it's the cell phone bill.
You're on a family plan?
We're on the family plan. Yeah, my
Oh,
wife, my dad, and my mom, they have phones. I have a work phone, so.
okay. That makes sense.
Mhm.
Have you ever had to take the four of you together and say, look, we've got to talk. We have an issue. We have to
Not the
talk.
four of us. Usually, it's been this with my mother and my wife and I. That's happened a couple times. Interestingly, I think it's always centered around the kitchen. I think that
Right.
was always the. So I think alluding to your point earlier regarding like we have good boundaries regarding our bedroom, our community space, but we only have one kitchen in the house, and I think that's always been the battle zone. We've had to have when a person comes to cook in the kitchen, like we don't have a good process or system for where the pots and pans go. This scissor, does it like it's my scissor? So like, can we have it in a drawer that only I use?
Don't cut paper with my vegetable scissor.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. And if I place it in this drawer, please don't take it out. Yeah, my dad actually hasn't been too involved. He's kind of
He's
like, all
like,
right,
keep
I'll
me
go with
out
the
of it.
flow. Yeah, yeah, I'll go with the flow. For some reason, I drink a cup of water, I leave it on the table, and it's gone. So something's happening. It's working.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly. Are you in a house or a condo?
a house.
And is your house big enough to install a granny flat or its own separate kitchen on the other side of the house? Would that have you ever thought about that, or is that
We've
just
thought about it. Yeah, we've thought about it. I mean, I think the biggest, if we could, I think we would do it. I think the biggest impediment is the cost because, we're talking in tens of thousands. So then definitely my wife and I have talked about would we take this 20,000 to build a separate area in the back or a kitchen, or could we survive in the kitchen? Is it worth $20,000? I think that's the big question. Is like,
and
is the pain worth $20,000?
I
And
guess
like
that
we haven't hit that
remains
point yet.
so
Yeah.
far the answer is no, but who knows in the future?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, definitely if several years down the line, once we're in a better financial position, once we feel like we've made good headways in our savings and investments, I think then we would, try to make things a little more comfortable. We've looked at house. Oh, look at this separate, this house has two kitchens. Like you can have one in the back. This house has like two fridges. We've researched it. Yeah. I think the biggest impediment is just the cost at this point.
Right. Yes. But you are in a high cost area. It seems like
Mhm.
you would be able to, if you wanted to get a loan for that kind of thing, to put in a kitchen. Of course, then
Right.
you'd be tortured for the 6 months or however long it takes to put the kitchen in. So who knows?
Right.
The family
Yeah.
might not survive that.
Yeah. 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 So that's something that we definitely need to consider. It's definitely not out of the question.
Hmm. So the last thing that Amy Goyer talks about is going with the flow. It sounds like your father is doing that, but perhaps your wife and your mother are the ones that feel conflicted.
When I was looking at this, going with the flow, it's definitely something that happens. I think conflicts are going to happen on a weekly basis just because when you have four adults living in a house that are family, it's natural. For us, my wife and I, just recognizing where my parents are coming from, I think that helps us to kind of get in a right mindset of, approach things with a mindset of appreciation instead of trying to say, okay, like this is not working for us, but at the same time like recognizing that hey, there's a cost to everything, and then
Right.
for us we've made conscious decision to cohabitate because there is a mutual benefit from both financial at the same time from a family perspective,
Right.
having it's comforting. I mean, like emotionally comforting to have my parents there and for them to have us there. So I think it's just recognizing that we've made a conscious decision to be here. We can't get everything that we want, but at the end, the benefit outweighs the cost, and there's just things that we have to work through. Coming back to the right mindset, try to look at everything from a very empathetic perspective.
Now, I have another question for you, and you can choose not to answer it if you don't want to, because it might be a little uncomfortable. On my show, we talk about sex. So my question is, you have
Yeah.
four married adults living together, and like it or not, your parents are at the age where they are probably still being intimate. And I'm assuming you and your wife are being intimate. How do you set those boundaries where, okay, don't knock on the door? Don't, or are you going out of town and staying in a hotel? I mean, what?
We've do that. So I think for intimacy, recognize the fact that my wife and I, we need our alone time. So I mean, not often, but if I say an average, maybe every couple months, we would do our own, just a quick weekend trip, like a 2-day trip somewhere. At home, I don't know with my parents. I guess I try to black out.
You don't think about that because
I don't think about that at all. I try not to. And then for my wife and I, yes, we have to make sure the door is locked and check it multiple times.
And the parents have locks on their doors too.
They do, yes, they have locks on their doors, yeah. And we kind of have I think like an unspoken, time throughout the day. And middle of the day, it might be okay to knock on the door, but after like 9 p.m.
Don't knock.
Don't knock, don't interrupt. Things can wait until tomorrow morning unless it's an emergency. So
unless the house is on fire, don't knock on the door.
Until something requires immediate attention. But yeah, I mean, we've been pretty good about after 9 o'clock not interrupting each other.
That's good. And the kids are in bed at that time, so they're not bothering anybody either.
Yeah, I mean, we try not to, but it's hard to control a 3-year-old. She'll, randomly walk around the house. So we have to be careful of that. I think we're actually more concerned with our kids barging into our room
than your parents.
Like our parents. Yeah, I don't think I can't even remember once if they ever knocked on the door after 9 o'clock. But
what about you knocking on their door?
I probably crossed that boundary more because we looked.
You didn't even think about it until
I know. I didn't think about it. Yeah. I was like, I need to be a little more considerate. Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard when you look at the older generation. You don't think of them as those kind of beings,
right? No. And that was the alluding to earlier. Like I think in my teens and 20s, we're just so self-absorbed that my parents, I'm the center of the universe, and my parents helped me to be the center of the universe. And then, as we get older, we realize, we're not. And then, and then as we, in my 30s, as now living with my parents, I'm like, wow, they actually have more interesting lives than we do.
Something to aspire to. Well, this has been fun. Thanks for coming on again and going through some tips and from the younger sandwich generation point of view. If any of my listeners want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
Sure. So I write at financialtortoise.com. I write about pretty much what we just discussed, being a sandwich generation and personal finance, just about how to manage our money better, and then how to cohabitate with our parents better. So yeah, you can find me at financialtortoise.com.
Great. Maybe your next article can be about sex and the sandwich generation.
Yeah, I'll need to sit down for that one. Yeah. I don't think I've found any articles about that.
Exactly. Yeah. There probably aren't any. That'll be a good article for anybody who's searching that topic. Thanks again. And for the listener, I hope you had as much fun as we did. And we'll see you next time on the Rock Your Retirement Show. Bye. Hey, this is just a shout out to Glenna Davis. And she has been a big supporter of mine on Patreon. And Glenna, if you're listening, I just wanted to thank you.